Hi everyone, and welcome back to Harp and Guitar, People and Music. So for today's video, I actually received a question from one of our subscribers here at Harp and Guitar, so I thought I would address that real quickly here. That subscriber's name is Iggy the Champ, so this one goes out to Iggy the Champ. And he wanted to know who the first blues artist was to play and record using an electric guitar or an electrified acoustic guitar, an acoustic with a pickup and an amp and all of that. Now that's a very interesting question, and it actually opens up a huge can of worms because there's a few schools of thought on this. Now, there's a few fellows that would credit Eddie Durham for recording the first blues song with electric guitar. And that song was Hit in the Bottle for Jimmy Lunsford. Eddie Durham played electric guitar on this, and it was recorded in September of 1935. But there's a little bit of an argument going on to this day about that song in particular, because most blues aficionados and folklorists and researchers, most blues purists, much like myself, actually would consider that song a jazz tune. And Eddie Durham being a lot more rooted deeply in the jazz flavorings and jazz phrasings of the way he played. So much so that he's actually credited for teaching Charlie Christian to play electric guitar. And later on, of course, Charlie Christian went on to become the consummate electric jazz guitarist pretty much of all time. Now, staying with that whole sort of time period, and talking a little bit about the jazzy guys that played electric guitar. Another school of thought, of course, is Mr. Lonnie Johnson. And any of you that are familiar and have been around here at Harp and Guitar for a while may recognize the name Lonnie Johnson. We've discussed him many times. And Lonnie Johnson literally recorded hundreds of songs through the late 20s and 30s and even into the 40s. And he also continued to perform live right up into the early 1960s, touring the United States and in Europe. But again, Lonnie Johnson, while considered a bluesman, often played many of his songs and his guitar phrasings with a lot of that sort of jazzy flavor to it. So many would consider his earliest recordings on electric guitar to be more rooted in jazz. Now, another name we're all familiar with and we've heard thrown around a lot is the name T-Bone Walker. Now, while T-Bone Walker was an early blues pioneer, an early electric blues pioneer, and played electric guitar quite early on, he's definitely not the first to record. He was experimenting with electric guitar and playing around with it as early as the late 1930s and into the early 40s, but he didn't actually make any commercial recordings using electric guitar until, I believe, 1945, when he recorded Mean Old World for Capitol Records. So, who was the first to record blues on electric guitar? It's kind of a tough question, but I'm going to have to cite Steve Hoffman, who's a blues researcher and historian and writer and a blues musician actually in his own right, and a record collector as well, much like old whiskey. And as a matter of fact, I have corresponded with Steve Hoffman in the past. So maybe I'm a little biased, but I know that Steve really does his homework and has researched this quite a bit here. And I'm going to have to go with Steve on this. And there was a band called Eddie Kirk and his 12 Clouds of Joy. And they performed a track called Floyd's Guitar Blues. And this song is probably most likely the first commercial blues recording with a blues guitarist playing electric blues guitar. And that gentleman's name, that bluesman's name, that first electric blues guitarist's name was Floyd Smith. And that song was recorded March 16th, 1939. And that's the song and the guitarist that is generally accepted amongst blues circles as being the first commercially recorded blues record featuring electric blues guitarist on electric guitar. Now, the style of blues guitar during that time, during the early period, was still very experimental. So there was a lot of different ways that a lot of these guys played the electric guitar. As I mentioned earlier in this video, of course, Lonnie Johnson and T-Bone Walker, while they were bluesmen, were rooted in more of a sort of a jazzy feel, so they had a lot more of a jazz flavor to their playing. But if you want to talk about strict 12-bar blues, the proper quote-unquote blues standard of a 12-bar blues would be this March 16th, 1939 recording. Now, if you listen to some of these recordings, some of the early stuff, especially the early slide players that were playing on electric guitar using a slide, you can definitely hear the early influences actually of the Hawaiian players. And that's why a lot of these guys sort of sound like they're playing a Hawaiian guitar style, because they were very deeply influenced by the Hawaiian players from the late 19-teens, 1918, 1919, into the very, very early 20s. And that's why even going into the 40s and 50s, you hear guys like Elmore James playing slide on an electric guitar, and the way he plays the slide sounds very Hawaiian in its influence. And a lot of the early guys through the 30s and 40s, like I said, sort of adopted this style, and that was sort of the mainstay for probably a couple of decades in the early blues, early electric blues, with the guitar and the slide playing. Very, very deeply rooted in that Hawaiian style. So, Iggy the Champ, hopefully this answers your question and doesn't cause too much confusion. Generally accepted, Floyd Smith playing with Andy Kirk and his 12 Clouds of Joy, Floyd's Guitar Blues. So I think that's going to do it for today here at Harp and Guitar, People and Music. So I want to wish all of you a great day. Thanks a lot for coming by today and joining us. And if you haven't already, please like and share the video, subscribe, and let us know what you think down in the comments below. Have a good one, and thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.